Our reading today is in Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7, and I'll also be reading from Matthew 21. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from the place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" And then Matthew 21. I'm only going to read the parable there, and it says, "What do you think? There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and he said, 'Son, go and work today in the vineyard.' 'I will not,' he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, 'I will, sir.' But he did not go. Which of the 2 did what his father wanted?" And this is the word of God for the people of God. It's called Murmuring Times today, part 2. If you'll remember, last week's sermon was the beginning of Murmuring Time. Or we could have called this message From High Water to No Water. Remember in the 10 Commandment movie, or in the wonderful animated version of Prince of Egypt? Imagine what it would have been like to have walked across on dry land under the Red Sea. In fact, in that animated version, the Prince of Egypt, and those massive columns of water that had been pushed back, there was even a well in one of those columns. But now, there is no water. They're in the desert of the Sinai, and all they see are the different shades of tan and brown. So high water to no water. And the people got thirsty. Very thirsty. I know we all know thirst. I still remember a day back in Forsyth, Georgia, on a baseball field when I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I was just so thirsty. I mean, I had just like cotton mouth, and during our break, I just couldn't quench my thirst. But I knew that I was going to get a chance to get water, and that makes a big difference. Kim recently learned that we should drink about half our body weight in ounces every day. So whatever the number of pounds, figure half of that in ounces. I must stay dehydrated, maybe like my entire life. And so there were somewhere around 2 million people. And that number included, of course, children and elderly and livestock. And livestock was the most important thing these people owned. And now they were worried that they might die soon if they didn't find water. So what do you think? Well, they fought with their leader, Moses. Give us water to drink. Moses took it personal. I'm sure it was difficult for Moses. He said, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? Because we're going to die along with our children and livestock unless we get water. Legitimate complaint, sure it is. And God hears them. Just like he did for food. God answers Moses. Go in front of the people. Take with them some of their leaders. And you see, I think that was because Moses really feared for his life. He expected to be stoned, but God put the leaders out front with him. And there, once again, they saw God use Moses in miraculous ways. He says, take the shepherd's staff, the very same staff that you used to demonstrate my power over Pharaoh, with a snake, with the water being turned to blood, with thunder and hail, with locusts and the splitting of the sea. It all came from God through Moses' staff. Now, one more. Moses, take your staff, for I am present at the rock of Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out for the people to drink. And it happened just as God said. Why later instead of sooner? I don't know. God's timing meant certainty that this water came from God and nowhere else. Years later, the psalmist will say in Psalm 74, give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. The things that we have heard and known, that our ancestors have told us, we will not hide them from their children. We will tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might, and the wonders he has done. In the sight of our ancestors, he worked marvels in the land of Egypt. And then, after detailing all the things that God had done, then we come to this in verse 15. God split rocks open in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. He made streams come out of the rock and caused waters to flow down like rivers. Years and years later, this story was being told by the people of Israel. And still, of course, to this day. Now, Moses believes he very much needs the last word, and so he names the place Masai and Meribah, meaning because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Years ago, the president of Mercer University, Dr. Kirby Godsey, wrote a book called When We Talk About God, Let's Be Honest. I've always liked that title because, simply speaking, sometimes when it comes to religious talk, we're not really that honest. But I think it's also just as important to say, think and believe that when we talk to God, let's be honest. When we talk to God, let's be honest. Well, not all of the Israelites murmuring and complaining and arguing in the wilderness was the same. Some of it will be petty and childlike, but this wasn't. This was honest and raw human need. We are thirsty, God. As I am writing this sermon, I just chanced upon a reel of a short clip of a sermon by Reverend Timothy Keller in that sermon, he said about Psalm 88 that it took an Old Testament professor to really help him understand Job. Job was honest. Job was painfully honest. His prayers were honest to God. He told God he was angry. He told God how he felt. And in the end, though, he was still praying to God. When all else had failed him, Job stayed in the trenches and talked with his God honestly. Is the Lord with us or not? It's just that kind of honesty. And God heard their honest prayer and will hear ours. That's why Jesus' parable hits home for so many then and also for now. A man had 2 sons. He went to the one son and he said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard." That son said, "I will not." But later he changed his mind and he went to work in the vineyard. And then there was the second son, and the father went and said the same thing. "Son, will you go to the vineyard and work for me?" This son said, "I will go, sir." But he never went. Jesus said, "Which of these 2 did the will of the Father?" Well, this parable is pretty straightforward and honest, and so the people listening said, the first one. When we struggle and when we cry, when we call upon our God in the rawest of emotion, when we believe that God has left us, we should tell God. And when we can't see and possibly can't understand if God is present in our lives, we got to tell God. Because God is with us. God is present in our lives. He is. In this passage, did you catch the part where God was on the rock? God was at the rock. God was present with Moses and the people. Today, on this Sunday, we'll come to the Lord's table and we'll celebrate the Lord's Supper. And the Lord is present. The Lord will be present for us to drink. Are you ready? Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, about this passage in Exodus, "For they drank from the same spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." Let's be honest in our prayers and in our work for the Lord. I hope to see you again here in the mountains next week.